What time? How are we still breathing? It's never for us to choose.
Sitting on the Puget Sound, just 140 miles away from the Canadian border, sits Seattle, Washington, one of the largest cities in the Pacific Northwest. With Mount Baker and the North Cascades to the east, Mount Rainier to the south, and the Olympic Peninsula to the west, Seattle is one of the best adventure cities in the US. We got an amazing taste of Washington's beaches, rainforest, and mountains, and we are excited to share how we did our road trip through the state. If you want to learn more about every specific place that we went, be sure to subscribe to our channel and be on the lookout for more videos coming soon, such as an ultimate guide to Mount Rainier and an ultimate guide to Olympic National Park. We began our trip by driving from Seattle to Sequim to visit Olympic National Park. Olympic National Park is huge. It's basically like 3 parks in one, so we wanted to divide the trip up to make sure we got to spend adequate time at each spot. The first section we decided to visit, Hurricane Ridge, is on the northern end of Olympic. The easiest way to access the mountains is through the Hurricane Ridge Visitor Center. Even if you're not really into hiking, I believe Hurricane Ridge Visitor Center is still worth visiting, as it's an easy drive from Port Angeles. The mountains here exceeded our expectations in every possible way. The best part about the Olympics is the fact that you start at sea level and then immediately ascend to around 6,000 to 7,000 feet. It's incredibly impressive. We hiked the Kearney Ridge Trail from the Visitor Center. There are 2 ways to do this trail. One of them is only 3 miles. We opted for the 7.5 mile version, as it gives you much better views along open mountain ridges, and at certain points you can even see into Canada across the ocean. We recommend doing the 7.5 mile version too, because the shorter 3 mile version doesn't really give you these views, and also is a lot harder because it's substantially steeper on switchbacks pretty much the entire time. After finishing our hike, we drove about 50 minutes to the Lake Crescent Lodge. This lodge is on our must-dos for the trip if you are planning to visit Olympic National Park. Make sure you eat in the dining room. Jordan got the crab mac and cheese, which was amazing, and I highly recommend getting it. After lunch, we decided to hang out at the lodge a little bit and spend some time exploring the grounds. This is a great place to stay for a relaxing vacation if you wanted a weekend in Olympic. After lunch, we headed to Devil's Punch Bowl, which is one of the most popular spots in the park. The trail to get here is about 2 miles out and back round trip. It is fully paved, which makes it pretty easy. Once we got to the Punch Bowl, it was super crowded. Looking back on it, I probably would have just swam at the Lake Crescent Lodge, so it would have been much less crowded, so we could have had a little more relaxing of a time. Lake Crescent blew us away. It really looks like Hawaii with the crystal blue, Gatorade colored water and the lush green mountains that surround it. After a strenuous day 1, for day 2, we decided we would check out Victoria, Canada, since it's only a 90-minute ferry ride away from Port Angeles. We even got to see orcas on the ride, which was awesome. Unfortunately, we didn't get any footage of it. Once we got off the ferry, we immediately noticed just how nice Victoria was. All the shops here are super clean, super unique, and even offer different things that are sold in the American stores. Once we got off, we tried to make it right to Farmhouse Coffee. It was one of the best coffees we've ever had and was super cheap. After getting coffee, we walked down Government Street, which I highly recommend you do as it has some cool shops on it. Next on our list of stops was the Fairmont Empress Hotel. This is one of the most recognizable buildings in Victoria. You see it right when you walk off the ferry, and it's definitely worth a walkthrough if you have the time. Inside, you'll find the Tea at the Empress, which is great to check out if you're into tea and you want a traditional tea room tasting experience. Wasn't necessarily our thing, but we did walk through it and see people in there, and it looked pretty neat. After exploring the Fairmont, we walked to Beacon Hill Park, located just 10 minutes outside of the city. Victoria is such a chill city, and this park adds to its ambiance. After Beacon Hill, we rushed back to the wharf to try to get some food before we got back on our ferry. We decided to eat at the Flying Otter Bar and Grill. Boarding the ferry on the way back was super easy, and we were on our way to Port Angeles. We got back around 5 p.m. and we enjoyed Hurricane Ridge so much the day before, we decided to go back to see it at sunset. The clouds had started to roll in at this point, so you couldn't see the Alps-like mountain peaks in the distance like we did in the morning, but it was a much more peaceful experience. The next morning, when we left our cottage in Sikkim, we drove to the western half of the park. On the way, we stopped at Fogtown Coffee, which was the best coffee we have ever had. You need to try it. Get the white mocha. It's amazing. If you're in Port Angeles, you have to stop here. Continuing on, we drove to Soc Duc Falls to do one of the quickest but most popular hikes in the park. We got there around 10:30 a.m. and the parking lot was full, but there is street parking. One of the things to note about Olympic is that most of the hikes are like this. They all have really small parking lots for some reason, but they do let you park in the street, which is nice. Soc Duc Falls is, to my surprise, on our must-do list for the trip. It doesn't take very long, and it's also not too hard to get to. You get to see a huge waterfall that provides some opportunities to get off the trail, which is always cool. And it was slightly crowded, but really not too bad compared to what I expected from one of the park's most popular trails. After hiking the falls, it was finally time to stop delaying and get to Forks. I'll admit it, I am a Twilight fan, so I was just as excited to see Forks as Jordan was, and unfortunately, it did let us down. It's about a 1-mile street with a few shops that sell some Twilight merch. That's about it. From there, it was time to go to our final destination of the day, Second Beach in La Push.
La Push, baby. It's La Push.
The hike to Second Beach is pretty easy and pretty simple. It's about 2 miles round trip, and we got to see our very first Pacific Northwest beach here. The sea stacks and tide pools are really fun to explore, and we saw lots of wildlife like starfish, crabs, anemones, and fish. Make sure you go at a low tide. You can find this tide chart linked in the description below. Just check this a few days in advance to see when low tide will be. While we were here, we stayed at the Cozy Coho Airbnb. It's a tiny home that you can stay in for yourself using the link in the description. The host's son sells firewood for $3 a bundle, which is actually a steal considering the other stands in the neighborhood sell it for $5. The tiny home has everything you need, and I would recommend it for a simple 2-day stay like we had. The final section of Olympic National Park that we had not seen was the Hoh Rainforest. We decided to head out to one of the only rainforests in the country around 7 a.m. to get there before the lines. It is filled with trees draped in moss that look like something out of a different planet. Getting to the Hoh early is very important. We got on the road around 7 a.m., hopefully to get there by 8. This is a video of what the line looked like when we were leaving the park around 10:30. If you don't get there early, you'll probably be sitting in line for about an hour just to get in and get a parking spot. Even at 8, the parking lot was full, but like Soc Duc, we had the ability to park on the street, which helped. You can hike the Hall of Mosses Trail, the Spruce Nature Trail, or the Hoh River Trail. The Hoh River Trail will bring you deep into the mountains if you want to go backpacking, but Hall of Mosses and Spruce was what we opted for due to our time constraints. The Hoh is definitely pretty, but if I had to sit and wait for an hour in line, I don't know if I would have done it because it's pretty similar to the trees that you get on the hike to Soc Duc Falls. If you're limited on time, I would probably recommend just doing Soc Duc and only hitting the Hoh if you have a 3rd or a 4th day in the park. We left the Hoh Rainforest a little earlier than we expected and decided to check out Ruby Beach and Kalaloch while we were down here. We went to Ruby Beach at high tide, and like I talked about earlier with the tide charts, it made a huge difference. That evening, we hit up the final beach of our Olympic trip, Rialto Beach. Rialto is famous for the hole-in-the-wall landmark that's about 1.6 miles away from the parking lot. It was an easy stroll on the beach, and we arrived at the peak of low tide. It was pretty crowded, so getting these shots did take a lot of time, but in the meantime, we managed to explore the tide pools and felt as if this was the best beach out of the 4 that we visited, so I would recommend coming to Rialto if you only have the time to visit one. For our last day in Forks, we lit a fire at our Airbnb and enjoyed s'mores together. Forks is a great place to unplug and just enjoy the beauty of the Olympic Peninsula. Today was the day that Jordan and I were super excited for, the drive to Mount Rainier National Park. We embarked on the 5-hour drive at 7:30 a.m. to make it to the park by our timed entry slot of 1 p.m. Rounding the corner on the road into the White River entrance, you get your first views of the mountain, and I don't think I've ever been so amazed by a natural landmark in my life than the first time seeing Mount Rainier. We decided to visit the sunrise side of the park first and hike the Mount Fremont Lookout Trail, which you can find an exact trail review in our TikTok page linked here. This trail is super popular on TikTok and Instagram for being a great spot for sunset and sunrise. Unfortunately, the timing didn't work out for us to catch either, so we went in the mid-afternoon, but it was still an awesome hike. There are alpine meadows, lakes, dramatic cliff sides, and of course, head-on views of Mount Rainier for the majority of the hike. Continuing through the hike will bring you to the coolest part, the Mount Fremont lookout. The lookout was super cloudy, which was unfortunate, but I did get to make some friends while I was there. The way back down was actually a lot tougher than the way up for us, and we were kind of wiped, so we had the choice of just going to our Airbnb in Ashford or trying to hike the High Rock Lookout Trail. We decided to hike the High Rock Lookout Trail at around 7 p.m. to catch a sunset. High Rock Trail is a steep, emphasis on steep, 3.2 mile out and back trail that leads you to possibly the best view in the entire state. The best part of High Rock is that it is not in the park, so it's free and the time you enter doesn't matter, and you can drone. We caught the most amazing sunset either of us have ever seen, and the footage truly doesn't do it justice. If you visit Mount Rainier, this is a must-do despite the difficulty of the hike. Hiking down in the dark was a great way to cap off this extremely long day, and I got some of the best sleep I've ever had after we checked into our Airbnb in Ashford. As always, you can find the link to this Airbnb in the description and find a walkthrough on our TikTok and Instagram pages. This place was great and it made for a perfect weekend stay. Today was sadly our final day of the trip, but it was our chance to see the paradise side of Mount Rainier. We started off at the Paradise Inn by getting coffee at the Catouche Cafe before starting our hike. This lodge is another must-see spot on this trip, and it's a great place to relax before or after attempting one of the most famous trails in the park, the Skyline Trail. I'm usually pretty 50-50 on whether or not I like the most popular trails in the park. This one, though, was totally worth it. It leads you through heaven-like fields until you eventually get to be face-to-face with Mount Rainier. Walking down to Glacier Vista gives you an uninterrupted view of one of the mountain's largest glaciers. You can see the many waterfalls coming off of it. Hiking all the way up to Panorama Point will give you some of the best views in the entire park, but it is a drag. It's very long, very steep, and the downhill sections are also a lot harder than you would think. One of the best parts of Mount Rainier is all the wildlife. On this trip, we saw mountain goats, marmots, birds, and plenty of deer. We went to the Mount Rainier Base Camp Bar and Grill for dinner, which was a quick place to grab a cheap bite to eat. It's super relaxing and it's very in character with the whole area. We spent our evening by going back to Mount Rainier, and by going back at sunset, we saw it from Reflection Lake, from Myrtle Falls, and from that magical meadow that is about a mile into the Skyline Trail. Finally, our trip had come to a close, and we woke up super early to drive back to Seattle the next morning to hopefully check out some of the city. We chose to spend most of our time exploring the University of Washington campus in northern Seattle. Washington State is a place that I believe everyone needs to visit at least once in their life. The Pacific Northwest has some of the prettiest nature that this country has to offer, and we plan on returning to it whenever we get the chance. Please consider dropping a like on this video if you enjoyed it and subscribing to our channel for more content coming soon. In 2 weeks' time, we plan on releasing our ultimate guide to Mount Rainier, and in the near future, a video on Olympic National Park as well.